The early morning mist clung to the towering pines of Yellowstone National Park, weaving a ghostly shroud through the dense wilderness. The Carter family's remote cabin sat in near silence, save for the occasional rustle of leaves as a light breeze swept through the clearing. On the worn wooden steps, 6-year-old Lillian Carter sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring out into the forest. Her copper-red hair caught the faint glow of the rising sun, though the warmth failed to reach her somber expression. It had been 3 months since her father, Nathan Carter, was found dead at the bottom of Raven's Gorge. The official report had called it an accident, but even at her young age, Lillian sensed the unspoken fear in her mother's voice whenever she spoke of it. Something wasn't right. Since then, Lillian had wandered the surrounding woods, searching for comfort in the familiar wilderness her father had taught her to love. But today, something felt different. A sudden, piercing howl shattered the morning stillness. It wasn't the distant call of a hunting pack or a territorial warning. It was raw, desperate, almost mournful. Lillian's heart clenched as the sound reverberated through the trees, sending a chill up her spine. She rose slowly, gripping the porch railing with small, trembling hands. Then, through the swirling mist, a shadow emerged. A massive gray wolf stepped forward, its fur streaked with dried blood, its powerful body moving with deliberate effort. But Lillian's breath caught, not at the sight of the wolf itself, but at what it carried in its jaws. A limp, battered wolf pup, its fur matted with dirt and crimson. The mother wolf set the injured cub gently at Lillian's feet, then stepped back, watching her with golden eyes that burned with something more than instinct: intelligence, trust, and an unspoken plea. Lillian should have run. Any other child would have. But instead, she stood frozen, her mind struggling to make sense of the impossible. She knew this wolf. Her gaze flickered to the familiar notch on the animal's left ear, a scar her father had described so many times in his research notes, in the photographs that lined the cabin walls. "Luna," she whispered. The wolf's ears twitched at the name. This was no wild predator acting on instinct alone. This was the wolf her father had rescued years ago. And somehow, impossibly, in its darkest moment, it had come back to the only humans it had ever trusted. Elena Carter stood by the cabin's window, gripping a half-empty coffee mug as her eyes drifted toward the tree line. The morning fog had begun to lift, revealing the towering pines that surrounded their isolated home. Her mind, however, was elsewhere, trapped in the past, in memories of Nathan Carter, her late husband. 3 months had passed since that terrible day, but the pain had not dulled. Nathan, a man who had spent his life studying and protecting Yellowstone's wolves, had been found dead at the bottom of Raven's Gorge. The official report called it an accident, blaming the treacherous terrain. But Elena knew her husband better than anyone. He was careful, experienced, and never reckless in the wild. A sudden noise snapped her back to the present. The cabin door swung open, and Lillian, their 6-year-old daughter, ran inside, her small hands covered in blood. Elena's heart stopped. "Lillian, what happened?" She rushed forward, grabbing her daughter's trembling hands. Lillian's green eyes, so much like Nathan's, were wide with fear, but not for herself. "It's Luna," she gasped. "She brought her baby. He's hurt." Elena's breath caught. Luna, Nathan's research wolf, the one he had spent years tracking, observing, and perhaps even forming a bond with. She hadn't seen the animal since Nathan's funeral. But why had she returned now? And with an injured cub? Before she could react, the sound of tires crunching against gravel filled the air. A dark SUV rolled up the dirt path toward the cabin, its tinted windows gleaming under the weak morning sun. Elena's stomach twisted. A man stepped out. Henry Carter, Nathan's older brother and a veteran park ranger. He was the only family she had left in this place, but his expression was grim, tense. Behind him, another vehicle pulled in, carrying Dr. Laura Finch, a wildlife veterinarian. "Elena," Henry said, his voice low. "We need to talk." Something in his tone made her blood run cold. She could see it in his eyes. This wasn't just about the wolf. It was about Nathan's death. And whatever the truth was, it was far worse than an accident. A heavy silence filled the air as Henry Carter closed the cabin door behind him, his face etched with concern. Elena could feel the weight of his hesitation before he finally spoke. "Elena," he said carefully, his voice low, "something's not right." She knew that already. She had known it since the day they told her Nathan had fallen to his death. But hearing it from Henry, a park ranger who always followed the rules, a man who never questioned authority, made the fear settle deeper in her chest. Lillian sat quietly in the corner, stroking the injured wolf pup wrapped in a blanket. Every so often, she would glance toward the window, searching for Luna, who lingered just beyond the tree line, her golden eyes glowing in the dim light. The wolf was waiting, watching. But for what? Before Henry could continue, the unmistakable sound of tires crunching over gravel sent a chill down Elena's spine. She turned toward the window, her breath catching at the sight of a black SUV rolling to a stop in front of the cabin. The vehicle was government-issued, its windows tinted so dark they reflected the forest like black mirrors. The door swung open, and a man in a pristine Park Service uniform stepped out. George Whitmore, the Yellowstone Park Director. Elena's pulse quickened. She had only met him once before, at Nathan's memorial. He had spoken of her husband's work with polished sympathy, but something in his eyes had unsettled her. Now, standing in front of the cabin, his expression was unreadable, his stance too controlled. Two other men emerged behind him, both dressed in plain black tactical gear. Not rangers, not law enforcement, but something else entirely. Whitmore took a slow step forward. "Mrs. Carter," he greeted smoothly, "we've received reports that you have a wolf on your property. You understand that's a direct violation of federal wildlife regulations." Elena stiffened. They knew. She opened her mouth to respond, but Henry's hand on her arm stopped her. He stepped in front of her, his posture rigid. "This isn't a violation," he said evenly. "The wolf isn't captive. She came here on her own." Whitmore barely spared him a glance. His focus was on Elena. "I won't waste your time," he said, voice calm but laced with quiet authority. "Hand over the wolf pup, and we'll be on our way." Elena felt Lillian's small fingers tighten around hers. The air in the cabin had turned suffocating. She knew, without a doubt, if she gave them the wolf, she would never see it again. The air inside the cabin had turned thick with tension. Elena's grip on Lillian's shoulder tightened as she met Whitmore's gaze, cold and calculating. "I'm not giving you the wolf," she said, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. Whitmore let out a slow breath, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his patience clearly wearing thin, "you have no idea what you're involved in." Henry shifted beside her. "Neither do you, Director," he countered, his voice edged with suspicion. The moment stretched unbearably, a silent battle of wills. Then Whitmore's jaw tightened. Without another word, he turned and gave a small nod to the two men behind him. They moved instantly. "Elena, get Lillian out of here," Henry barked as the first man lunged forward. Elena didn't hesitate. She grabbed Lillian's hand and bolted for the back door, her heart pounding as a crash erupted behind her. Henry, grappling with one of the men. The second one was coming. "Elena, run!" Henry shouted. She barely had time to push through the door before she heard a sickening thud. Henry's grunt of pain, then the sound of a body hitting the floor. She didn't look back. Lillian clutched the wolf pup tightly against her chest as they raced through the dense trees. The child's breath came in sharp gasps, her small legs struggling to keep pace, but she didn't complain. The forest was their only hope now. Then, behind them, the unmistakable roar of an engine. Elena risked a glance over her shoulder and felt her stomach drop. The black SUV had turned onto the dirt trail, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin predators' eyes. "They're coming!" Lillian's voice was barely more than a breathless cry. Elena's mind raced. They couldn't outrun a vehicle. But there was one thing Whitmore's men hadn't counted on. From the shadows of the forest, a silent figure emerged. Luna. The wolf's golden eyes flickered toward Lillian, then toward the approaching threat. Then, without hesitation, she turned and ran in the opposite direction, her form a streak of silver against the darkened trees. A distraction. Elena didn't waste the chance. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered, tightening her grip on Lillian's hand as they vanished into the wilderness. Behind them, the first gunshot rang out. The night air was thick with tension. the forest alive with the sounds of pursuit. Elena's breath came in ragged gasps as she pulled Lillian forward, their footsteps crunching against the damp underbrush. The distant roar of the SUV's engine echoed through the trees, headlights slashing through the darkness like a predator searching for its prey. Lillian clutched the wolf pup close to her chest, its tiny body trembling with exhaustion and fear. "Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of their footsteps. "Luna, where is she?" Elena's stomach twisted. She knew. She had seen the moment Luna made her decision, breaking away from their path, veering toward the noise, drawing the attention of the men hunting them. A deliberate act, a sacrifice. And now, the gunshots had started. A sharp crack rang out through the trees, followed by another. Then silence. Lillian stopped abruptly, her small frame shaking. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "No, no, no." Elena crouched, gripping her daughter's face in her hands. "Sweetheart, we have to keep moving," she urged, though the words felt like knives in her throat. Lillian's breath came in sharp, broken sobs, her tears streaking through the dirt on her face. She saved us," she choked out. Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. She couldn't deny it. Luna had given them a chance to escape, but at what cost? Behind them, the distant hum of engines began to fade. The men had stopped chasing. They had found what they were looking for. A single, mournful howl cut through the stillness of the night. Lillian's entire body stiffened, her head snapping toward the sound. "She's still alive," she gasped. But Elena knew better. That howl was not a call for help. It was a farewell. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to stand. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered, gently pulling Lillian forward. The child didn't resist this time, but as they disappeared deeper into the forest, Lillian clutched the wolf pup even tighter, as if holding on to the last piece of Luna she had left. The first rays of dawn barely touched the horizon when Elena, Lillian, and Henry Carter finally reached the safety of the tribal sanctuary deep within the Yellowstone wilderness. The ancient land, protected by laws far older than the park itself, stood as their last stronghold. The cabin where they had sought refuge was small but sturdy, tucked against a rocky hillside. Inside, Joseph Blackfeather, a respected elder of the local tribe, stood waiting. His lined face was unreadable, but his dark eyes held understanding. "We heard the shots," he said gravely, glancing at the exhausted group. "You weren't followed?" Elena shook her head, her body still trembling from the night's events. "Luna led them away," she whispered, her throat tight. She didn't make it." Joseph lowered his gaze. A spirit as strong as hers does not leave this world so easily. Lillian clung to the wolf pup in silence, her eyes hollow, haunted. Elena knew her daughter was forever changed. They all were. But grief would have to wait. The real fight was just beginning. Henry pulled out a small waterproof case, placing it on the cabin's wooden table with deliberate care. "Nathan knew," he said, looking at Elena. "He had evidence of what they were planning, and he was killed for it." Elena's fingers trembled as she opened the case. Inside was a memory card containing shot video footage from one of Nathan's hidden trail cameras. Joseph motioned for silence as Henry inserted the card into a laptop. The screen flickered to life. The first few clips showed aerial surveys over the northern valley, followed by men in construction gear setting up drilling equipment inside protected parkland. The next video sent ice through Elena's veins. Whitmore himself, standing at the dig site, speaking to a man in a suit. The audio was grainy but clear. "Make sure the wolves are gone before we push this any further. I don't care what it takes. Nathan Carter is already a problem. I don't want him complicating things." The final clip was timestamped the morning of Nathan's death. He was on camera, setting up a trail cam near the survey site. Then a shadow moved behind him. The footage cut out. Elena's breath caught. "They murdered him." Henry exhaled sharply. "And now we have proof." The only question left was, would it be enough to bring them down before it was too late? The storm that had been brewing for months finally broke. By midday, Henry Carter and Joseph Blackfeather had secured a meeting with Beth Andrews, a tenacious investigative journalist who had spent years exposing corruption within environmental agencies. When they showed her the footage, she didn't hesitate. Within hours, the story was live. The images and audio were damning. Secret drilling operations, illegal land assessments. Whitmore caught on camera ordering the elimination of Yellowstone's wolves. And then, the final chilling piece, Nathan Carter's last known moments, seconds before he was silenced forever. The story spread like wildfire. News networks picked it up. Social media exploded. The public, already divided over conservation policies, erupted in outrage. Elena sat in the tribal sanctuary, watching the chaos unfold on the small television set in the corner of the room. Her hands trembled, but not with fear. For the first time in months, she felt something close to hope. Then the retaliation came. Less than an hour after the story broke, a black SUV screeched to a stop outside the cabin. Henry was already at the window, gun drawn. "It's them," he murmured. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. Whitmore had been exposed, but that also made him dangerous. The door burst open. Two men in suits, one in a Park Service uniform, and behind them, George Whitmore himself. His face was pale, sweat glistening at his temples. The polished mask he had always worn was gone. He looked like a man cornered. "Mrs. Carter," he said, forcing a thin smile. "Let's be reasonable." Elena cut him off. "You killed my husband." Whitmore's tightened. "You have no idea how this works." Joseph stepped forward. "Actually, we do." He held up his phone, turning the screen to Whitmore. A live feed. Thousands of people were watching. Whitmore went still. His eyes darted to the camera in the corner of the room, the microphone on the table. Elena saw it then. The moment he realized there was no escape. The sound of sirens shattered the silence. Outside, federal agents poured into the clearing, rifles raised. George Whitmore had spent years controlling the wilderness, but today, the wilderness fought back. The biting chill of winter had long faded, giving way to the slow but persistent warmth of spring. 1 year had passed since the events that had nearly torn their world apart. The towering pines of Yellowstone stood as they always had, whispering their secrets to the wind, but the land bore a new kind of stillness, one of healing, of renewal. At the heart of it all stood the Nathan Carter Wildlife Research Center. Once an abandoned outpost, now a thriving sanctuary dedicated to the very creatures Nathan had devoted his life to protecting. The air buzzed with quiet activity, scientists reviewing data, rangers patrolling the perimeter, young volunteers cataloging the latest findings. And at the center of it all was Lillian Carter. The girl, now 7, knelt in a patch of tall grass, notebook in hand, watching a young wolf circle her playfully. His thick gray coat shimmered under the afternoon sun, his golden eyes alive with curiosity and something deeper, a knowing intelligence passed down through blood and memory. "Scout," Lillian called gently, and the wolf lifted his head, ears twitching at the familiar sound of his name. He had grown strong, no longer the frail, injured pup his mother had carried to their doorstep. Scout had survived. And in doing so, he had become more than just a lone wolf. He had become a symbol, a bridge between two worlds. Elena stood on the research center's porch, watching her daughter with quiet pride. Beside her, Dr. Laura Finch flipped through a file of Scout's behavioral data. "He's responding well to the training," she noted. "Much more than any wild wolf I've worked with." Elena nodded. "Because he's not just any wolf," she murmured. "He was raised with trust, not fear." The past year had not been easy. The trial against George Whitmore and his associates had been long and grueling, but in the end, justice had prevailed. The illegal mining project had been shut down permanently. New laws had been enacted to prevent further exploitation of Yellowstone's wildlife. Nathan's name had been cleared, his work recognized as groundbreaking. But nothing could undo what had been lost. Lillian looked up at the sky, where the setting sun bathed the valley in gold. Scout tilted his head back and let out a long, mournful howl, a call that carried across the land. Elena closed her eyes. She could almost hear Luna's voice in the wind, watching, guiding, never truly gone. In the end, this story is not just about a wolf, a girl, or even a family seeking justice. It is about the profound and often overlooked bond between humans and nature. It is about the choices we make when faced with power, greed, and the cost of doing what is right. Luna's sacrifice was not in vain. She proved what Nathan Carter had always believed, that wolves are not mindless predators, but intelligent, deeply emotional creatures capable of trust, loyalty, and love. Scout, the pup she fought to save, stands as a living testament to her legacy, a bridge between two worlds that so often stand in conflict. But this story is not unique. Around the world, countless animals suffer at the hands of those who see them only as obstacles or resources to exploit. Wildlife is disappearing at an alarming rate, driven by illegal hunting, habitat destruction, and corporate greed. The fight to protect them is not just the responsibility of scientists or conservationists. It belongs to all of us. If Luna could place her trust in a human, if Nathan Carter could dedicate his life to proving that wolves deserve a place in this world, then what can we do? We can educate ourselves. We can support wildlife conservation efforts. We can raise our voices against those who would destroy the natural world for profit. Most of all, we can remember that every creature has a story, a purpose, and a right to exist. Lillian Carter learned this lesson in the most painful way, but she also learned that even in loss, there is hope. And as Scout's howl carries through the valley, we are reminded that the wild still speaks. All we have to do is listen.